Hello there, RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. I just finished another playthrough of Dragon's Dogma and started a new game plus on the hard mode. I'm also playing a separate playthrough on my Switch with a Strider vocation just because I can't get enough of this damn game, and I'm also checking it out on PS5 as well. Ever since Capcom started dropping videos for the sequel, the interest for Dragon's Dogma has arisen.
You are it, Todd.
Yes.
I've been preaching about this game for a long time, and I made videos about some combat features a couple of years ago. This time around, I really want to talk about some specific gameplay features which could have been easily considered as next gen way back in 2012. But sadly, Skyrim has overshadowed not only Dragon's Dogma, but some other great RPGs like Kingdoms of Amalur, which also happen to have a great action combat system. However, Dragon's Dogma introduced something that we never experienced before in a story-driven, open-world RPG. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth is the latest installment in the Yakuza series. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth launches January 26, 2024 on PlayStation, Xbox and Windows and Steam. Pre-order now and get a Heroes Booster Pack and special job set before it's too late. For more information, visit infinitewealth.sega.com.
Welcome to paradise.
Aloha! All right!
I can show you around now. There's a few things you need to learn before we have a good time.
You can have a little fun with some friends. And even pick up a new skill. Whatever you do, be careful. Even paradise can have its secrets.
You trying to tell me there are Yakuza in Hawaii?
Not exactly something you'd find in a guidebook, is it?
Keep your friends close. And your enemies closer.
Name's Dwight.
Nice to meet you.
Take cover!
Open-world RPGs were always really struggling with the action combat system, and it's not so hard to see why. These RPGs have so many different features which need to come together in order to make a compelling role-playing experience. Before 2012, it was very hard to find a big RPG with amazing combat mechanics, which we usually see in pure action-oriented games. Well, Capcom had a great idea to finally do something about it. Dragon's Dogma felt like a breath of fresh air, to say the least. Climbing on big monsters during the fight makes so much sense, yet no other open-world RPG even tried to implement a similar mechanic before. The only game that comes to mind is Shadow of the Colossus, but that's a totally different game in general. Let me ask you this, how many times you fought a dragon in an RPG or any bigger monster and you wished that you could do a bit more than just stand there and hack and slash its feet?
Congratulations, Lariat!
The term next gen was almost always associated with improvements to graphics in games. The gameplay, especially in these types of games, have stagnated and we couldn't see any notable improvements for a long time. This started to create a huge disparity between the presentation and gameplay mechanics because the thing you see on the screen is way cooler than what you're actually doing with your controller. This continued way after Dragon's Dogma released because no one even tried to replicate some of these game mechanics in action-oriented RPGs. The most impressive thing about being able to climb on monsters in Dragon's Dogma is that it works like an actual combat mechanic, it's not just a gimmick. I don't know about you, but I will always prefer a free-form type of combat over heavily scripted sequences and gimmicky mechanics. Do I even need to remind you about the period when all game studios thought that quick-time events is the way to move forward? Up to the point where some games almost completely disregarded actual combat mechanics in favor of spamming a specific button and watching your character do something very cool. Well, I didn't because I played a bunch of these older games in my Hidden Gems of Trash series. Yeah, anyway, literally any other similar RPG that came out before Dragon's Dogma would just slap a scripted event, a gimmicky mechanic, or a QTE on top of the fight in order to enhance the feeling of fighting a big monster. And while that's not bad per se, it's certainly a lot different than having actual game mechanics which allow you to do something similar in real time. These, let's call them events, should be in the game, but only for enhancing the immersion or the presentation. Speaking of which, even Dragon's Dogma has such features, but they are few and far between. They are not nearly as overused as in other games because there is no need for it. The game already has actual combat mechanics which are cinematic enough. But that's obviously much harder to do in real-time action combat, so many studios don't even try, and I guess I can't blame them. Especially when it comes to AA studios and lower budget RPGs. On the other side, big studios nowadays will rarely take any serious risks, but it seems like that's finally starting to backfire a little bit. Anyway, the reasons for climbing the monster in Dragon's Dogma also depends on the monster itself. Some monsters require you to hit a specific weak spot, like this golem. Armored trolls can be manipulated by triggering the grabbing animation and they will accidentally remove the helmet, making them easier to kill, or you just want to do some quick damage while mounted. It always feels epic, especially when you climb a flying monster like the griffin or a dragon, which can get you really high in the air. You have to watch out for that stamina meter though, and the monster will try to shake you off. Capcom will implement similar mechanics in their Monster Hunter games as well, although there is a big difference between these games. One thing they have in common is a really satisfying combat system. Dragon's Dogma and Monster Hunter games have a lot of attacks with long animation locks. Now, this would feel really janky and unresponsive in pretty much all other games, because it's really hard to do properly. The hitboxes and enemies in general need to be properly coded to complement this style of combat, with the same set of rules like the playable character. Luckily, Capcom had a lot of experience with similar style of third-person action combat in Monster Hunter and Devil May Cry, so it wasn't that surprising that Dragon's Dogma managed to nail those mechanics. If I'm not mistaken, Dragon's Dogma is the first Capcom game that introduced climbing on monsters, and only a year later Capcom will implement something similar in Monster Hunter 4. They continued implementing climbing mechanics in new Monster Hunter games as well. However, this feature is much more complex in Dragon's Dogma. It seems like the sequel will just double down on this mechanic and make it even better, as it should. In fact, the sequel seems to drastically improve this feature, judging by all the gameplay videos we saw so far. You can now stand on the monsters, which also allows you to cast your abilities, which is totally insane. Capcom just continues to push the boundaries of these mechanics once again, and I guess the long wait for the sequel will pay off. Your followers can also climb monsters in Dragon's Dogma, which brings us to our second major topic. If you've been watching this channel for a long time, you might remember a pretty old video where I talked about AI in RPGs. Probably not, because it didn't get a lot of views, but I always thought that AI will play a huge role when it comes to the next-gen gameplay in RPGs, not just in combat. That's one of the reasons why I love those old niche RPGs like Gothic series, because the AI made this game world so immersive. It was way ahead of its time, and even today you'll struggle to find an RPG with more immersive AI behavior. In fact, these old RPGs would put to shame the majority of recently released AAA RPGs.
Let me pass.
This is where Dragon's Dogma comes into play. The AI in this game is absolutely amazing, and people really take it for granted nowadays. I know a lot of people like to make memes out of the repetitive pawn dialogue, but putting that aside, the functionality of this system is absolutely impressive and very unique. Up to the point where it could revolutionize single-player RPGs, but once again, it seems really hard to develop properly.
Now, bring fire! Bring scale upon it!
So how exactly it works? Well, just like in majority of single-player RPGs, you get a couple of followers to join your party. But unlike in other RPGs, these followers have an advanced AI that will constantly learn things as you play. For example, you can see how many stars they have in fights against different enemy types. Same goes for the quests. If the stars are maxed out, they will know exactly how to fight and what to use against that particular enemy.
Quickly! The horse is
or what to do in that particular quest.
I've learned what to do in this quest.
They will constantly give you tips as you fight and be aware of any dangerous attacks from the enemy so they can react properly. As I mentioned before, they can also climb on monsters and hit the weak spots or even save you from a dangerous situation. For example, the Hydra can swallow you if you're not careful, but if one of your opponents has enough knowledge about this fight, they will try to attack that particular heads. If not, you'll just die after about 30 seconds. That's just one of many examples that can happen in fights. If one of your party members falls in the battle, you have to revive them by picking them up. Other pawns will try to pick them up and bring them closer to you in the middle of the fight. They can hold smaller monsters and humanoid NPCs so you can do more damage to them. They'll pick up items for you, give you hints about your current quest, and even lead you to the location of the quest sometimes.
This way to the catacombs, Arisen.
All of that depends on their previous experience with the quests, enemies, and the locations on the map. If you try to compare this follower system to Skyrim, it's like going back to the Stone Age. Don't get me wrong, I love Skyrim, but the AI for followers in that game is pretty bad. Overall, the ultimate goal is to create a comprehensive party of characters that will complement your own vocation. The hard mode is way more challenging than normal mode, so having a good party is a big deal. But if you stick around long enough and play this game like crazy, you can also play solo with no issues. The coding for the followers is absolutely impressive and it's very polished, like pretty much all features in the game. With such complex AI behavior, you would expect to see at least some bugs or glitches here and there, but that almost never happens. Almost. If you compare this party system to literally any other RPG with similar features, it will put them to shame. It's so much more advanced than anything else out there, even today, after almost 12 years. If that sounds impressive, well, it's not even the best thing about this AI system. Even though Dragon's Dogma is a single-player RPG, it has some online features. When you start the game, you'll get to make your custom follower. The game will then register the follower in the online database and other players can recruit your follower to join their party. They will gain experience and some items while being in the party of other players. You can search for a specific pawn that you need while visiting the Riftstones. It's a brilliant and a very unique system. It goes even further than that, but saying more would just count as a major spoiler. If you're playing in online mode, the game will slowly fill up the world with pawns from different players. They will casually walk in the open world or in the city. I don't think we ever saw anything similar in other games. Filling up the world with followers from other players sounds way better than just slapping generic NPCs on the map. I just hope Capcom improves this in the sequel even further and maybe make them more interactive even when they're not in your party. Besides the climbing mechanic and the amazing AI, Dragon's Dogma had some other very cool gameplay features. For example, the body type of your character is not just for cosmetic purposes. If you make your Arisen shorter, there will be instances where you can use that to your advantage. While that sounds like a really cool idea, this feature is definitely underdeveloped. There are only a few instances where this actually matters. On the other side, you can make your character very tall, which makes it easier to hit dragon wings in the air and bring them down. Some locations in the game have very strong winds, and if your Arisen is heavier, the wind won't push you back that much like if your character is skinnier. Again, it's a very cool concept, and I wish the sequel just improves it a lot. Adding more zones where you can take the advantage of your character body type would be very cool. Oh yeah, let's not forget that ogres will be much more aggressive if your party is full of women. Yeah, very next gen indeed. The last thing I want to talk about is the soft target lock. Now look, I love Souls-like games, I played and completed a bunch of them, along with the mainstream titles by From Software. However, I never liked how most of these games utilize the hard target lock. It's not game-breaking or a huge deal, but like I said before, I think free-form type of combat is much more enjoyable, at least for me. so I tend not to use the lock-on system in Souls-like games unless I absolutely have to in some boss fights. Older games like Dark Souls 1 were more manageable even without using the lock-on, since the game was slower and more methodical compared to newer Souls-like games. And I think that's the exact reason why Dragon's Dogma can avoid having a target lock, and very good hitboxes also help a lot in this case. That doesn't mean the combat in Dragon's Dogma is slow and sluggish, far from it actually. The gameplay speed is just perfect for this type of combat. That being said, the Dragon's Dogma has a target lock, but only for certain magic and ranged attacks. The melee attacks, however, all have a soft target lock system. Combined with some very good hitboxes, this creates a great free-form type of combat. The game doesn't mess around with your camera perspective or cause frustrating gravity deaths. I saw some comments on Dragon's Dogma 2 videos that the gameplay seems very slow, which might be true if you compare it to some new Souls-like games. But once you try out the combat in Dragon's Dogma or even Monster Hunter, it won't take long until you understand why that's the case. It's certainly a very different style of action combat that takes a while to get used to, but the same can be said about Souls-like games as well. Now, let's not forget that Dragon's Dogma had some issues as well. It's not a flawless RPG by any means. The open world had some cool locations to explore, but this could be improved a lot in the sequel. Some areas in the game felt really bland and not that interesting to explore. The story is very forgettable, and there are only a handful of semi-memorable characters. It seems like Capcom is trying to improve this in the sequel, so we'll see. This video is not a review, so I'll save all the criticism for that video. This video was supposed to show you why I think the Dragon's Dogma had next-gen gameplay features way back in 2012. So do you agree with me or not? Leave a comment down below. If you like this video, feel free to check out my other content on the channel. I focus on RPGs, and I have a couple of different running series on the channel that you might find interesting. You can also check out some of my t-shirts and hoodies on the official store. I have many different designs in the theme of the channel. Many thanks to all of my channel members and Patreons, and I'll see you in the next one.